sir. Lily ma'am. Ma'am,
Yes, ma'am.
you can start.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Mageshwaran sir, start it.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you very much. Thank you. A very pleasant morning to all. I'm Ageshwaran, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Immaculate College for Women, Beriyur, Kallakurchi District. I welcome you all for this 2 days international webinar on colonialism, beginning with PG Department of English. Colonialism supports the political and legal domination over an alien society. Relationships and political dependence, exploitation between imperial powers and the colony, and racial and cultural inequality. Colonialism is the building and the maintaining of colonies is one territory by people from another territory. The word colony comes from the Latin word colonium, a place for agriculture and economics within the territory of the colony, achieved by the colonists. Colonialism normally refers to a period of history from the 15th to 20th century when people from Europe built colonies on other continents. Now, first of all, I would like to invite to give welcome address Dr. P. Renee Melina, Head of the Department of English, Immaculate College for Women, Viriyur, Kalakuchi District. Once again, welcome, ma'am.
Yes, sir. Thank you for that. Good morning, everyone. I pleased to welcome you all for this two-day international webinar on colonialism 2021. I am grateful to many experts who have come here to share their knowledge today. First, I would like to welcome our Reverend Sister Dr. A. Fatima, Secretary and Principal of our college, for being present and sharing this valuable moment with us. Next, I invite our first day resource person, Dr. L. Sangeeta, ma'am. And I gladly invite our staff members and my dear students, ICW with you, to have the nuclear of this program. Once again, I welcome you all for this intellectual and joyful event. Hope this international webinar will provide you with valuable things, and I wish you better learning and you will have a fruitful time here. Thank you for all.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your wonderful welcome address for this 2 days international webinar, 21st and 22nd of 2021. Once again, thank you, ma'am. Next, I would like to invite Mr. G. Pandian, Assistant Professor, Department of English, to give resource person introduction. Welcome, sir.
Welcome. Very good morning to all. I'm audible.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Warm greetings to everyone present here. It is indeed a great pleasure to be amid this May gathering. On behalf of Department of English, Immaculate College for Women, Viriyur, Kallakurchi, I proudly welcome you all for this 2 days international webinar on colonialism to post-colonialism. A woman with great vision and mission, an icon for hard work. She is our chief guest, Dr. L. Sangeeta, Head PG Department of English, Government Arts and Science College, Kallakurchi, who has crossed the boundaries of excellence with a great spirit towards profession. I welcome you, ma'am.
Thank you, sir.
I
Thank you
warm,
for your.
uh,
Sorry.
Next, I warmly and respectfully welcome Dr. Sister Dr. A. Fatima, Principal and Secretary, IGW, Viriyur, Kallakurchi, who has been the builder behind this webinar. I welcome you, sister. I feel happy to welcome Dr. P. Rini Malina, Head Department of English, who has been backbone of this webinar. I extend my welcome to all the faculty, volunteers, students, participants, research scholars. Once again, I welcome you all. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your fabulous introduction about our resource person, Dr. L. Sangeeta, ma'am. Head of the Department of English, Government Arts and Science College, Kalakurchi. Thank you, sir. Next, I would like to invite our resource person, Dr. L. Sangeeta, ma'am. Department of English, Government Arts and Science College, Kalakurchi, to deliver a speech regarding entitled colonialism. Once again, welcome, ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah. Good morning, one and all. Thank you for your invitation. Even in this pandemic period, we are connected through these webinars. First, I would like to request all the participants and my dear friends, be safe in home and be safe with your family. Just attend those programs in online, and please don't go out of your home, because today is a very hectic condition and very worst condition in all over the country, not at all over the country, all over the world. So please be safe at home. Thank you. First, I would like to thank Immaculate College for Women, Reverend Sister Fatima, and Head of the Department, Rini, and all the organizing committee for inviting me as your resource person for this two-day international webinar. Thank you once again to one and all in Immaculate College. Next, I would like to thank our Honorable Vice Chancellor, S. Thamarichilvi ma'am, and Professor Syed Shafi for allowing us to do such programs in online for the welfare of the students, and also to the research scholars and staff members. Next, I welcome and thank to all our fellow participants, because without them, the program will be nothing. So I invite you all and thank to participating in this program. So today I'm going to present the topic colonial to post-colonial literature, a survey. So the post-colonial literature often opposes the instructions of the colonialism era and discusses the impacts and consequences of the liberalization, and investigates the procedure of the developments and the political cultural independence of the people who have torn the chains of the colonialism. So this literature also literally analyzes the texts of colonial and ethnic tendencies. So with its background of colonial experiences and its present post-colonial culture, India is a comprehensive subject for post-colonial studies and the resulted impacts. In fact, the post-colonial literature in India means freedom from the old cover of the Western thoughts and paradigms, and the emergence of awareness and new intellectual concepts that make self-expression, that is very important. So the post-colonial period in India has resulted in shaping new identities and cultures that through studying and surveying the colonial period attempt to re-explore their marginalized identities and cultures, and to constitute a modern society by creating new mental and analytical structures based on the Indian culture. Indeed, the Indian writers have challenged even the post-colonial definitions and parameters. And although in the majority of the Britain's colonies, the English language has been the language of the literature of the post-colonial stage. The Indian writers have developed their indigenous languages within, along with it, Emergence of the post-colonial literature in India is the authentic representation of these and developments. And the Indian historians incorporated European aesthetic standards and theories of history into their writing, yet they managed to transform these ideas in ways that challenge British ideological domination. To analyze in writing a distinctly Indian history of India, they produced a historiographical style of great complexity, deploying brilliant reconfigurations of the dominant themes, styles, ideologies, and tropes that characterize acceptable modes of history writing in the West. And during the colonial period in India, English historians portrayed the British conquest and domination of India as the realization of a historic destiny, absorbing the particular history of India into the overarching of the empire. And when Indian scholars educated in the British system began to write their own histories of the period, they had to struggle to reclaim their past and to make the Indian people the subject of their history. And the differentia of the history that complicates theories of cultural globalization in the Indian case as its experience of colonialism. The residues of this history, the cultural land, showing up both in unexpected and predictable ways in the quotidian cultural habits of the nation. Most importantly, they influence the self-conception of these caught in the in-between space engendered by colonial rule, and the objects of this topic are allocated in this in-between space, foreground this historical interaction in especially prominent ways. And each of them, while having come to fruition due to the forces of globalization, also thrives because of its ability to tap this historical race. In each instance, this residue exists in the realms that co-constitute the identity of subjects involved in this topic. And while we can see the goal is to show the operation of these residues within the psychic realm of subjects, and an adequate understanding of how it informs subjects' entities. And by understanding these continuities and how they to the historical anti-colonial movements and that long after the end of direct colonial rule, its affects continue posits that the historical past of colonialism continues to determine the past from the perspective post-colonial societies will unravel how these structures can operate today. And post-colonial studies, rife with contentious internal debates, and argue that if the post in the post-colonial were merely a temporal marker to indicate what came after it is prematurely celebrated in and now end of the colonialism in our world. And in announcing the passage societies from one stage of history to another, the discipline buys into the very structures that it is trying to subvert. That is trying to subvert. It subsumes differences between the so-called post-colonial societies societies by assuming that all colonial experiences were the same, and reinstates the binary of the colonial or post-colonial, and therefore makes futile the desire to challenge the other binaries such as self-other, metropolis, colony, center, periphery. These are the things. And along the lines of McClinton, McClinton, other scholars too have argued for separate treatment of the differential experiences of post-colonial societies. Given the irresolvable disputes around the term, Robert Young has suggested the alternative term of tricontinentalism as a discourse that takes into account the divide between Europe and North Europe and North America on the one hand, and Asia, Africa, and Latin America on the other. Body's theorization is also complicated by a continued ambivalence within post-colonial societies on the long-term effects of colonial rule. One, those arguing for the unintended beneficial consequences of colonial rule use among the for examples, the imposition of a European language and the introduction of modern technology and capitalism of to these former agrarian economies. Supporters of this position are often theorists of modernity, such as Ernest Gallner in 1993, and not much the violence of colonial rule, but the processes of modernization that were set into motion due to it. And post-colonialism post-colonial theorists counter this position by arguing that to justify colonial rule under the guise of an enabling violation would be a travesty, and the unintended consequences of colonial rule cannot be used to retrospectively justify it and allied over its violence. Next, we can see contestations and ambivalence within it. Helps the position of this in a tradition and asks similar to the ones that to this topic to by looking at history and culture. Culture and the interactions between the two, post-colonial studies introduces the variable of history within the over-generalized contemporary global culture scene. And its central point of intervention is Western epistemology and a mode of knowledge production that would be unsustainable with presupposing the implicit other. And this presupposition privileges certain histories, certain cultures, and world views that are. Instead, resistant post-colonial mode of historiography must show that European history has invariably been the silent referent for other histories. As an object in comparison, it's the yardstick by which to judge other societies and cultures. Terming this the artifice of history, Depeche returns the gains to provincialize Europe in return. So the post-colonial study extends this challenge to the universal idioms and theories within European knowledge to show their Eurocentric premises. By pursuing over 300 years of colonial literature, Edward Said in 1979 challenges this Eurocentrism by showing that the European view of the world was an act of self-consolidating negation. Similarly, Spywalk in 1999 rereads Kant, Hegel, and Marx to claim that the central conception of European philosophy were arrived through the forced closures and stake misleadings of others to the other of Europe. And these strategies were both means to subsume difference as well as a means for them to explicate their concepts by marking that very difference. And given that culture was a crucial terrain within which colonial power was exercised, the interventions made by colonial rule in the realm of culture and its continuities in the post-colonial times are crucial to this topic. And scholars have argued that colonial influences in this realm both prepared the ground for and furthered the conceived use of power in the realm. And even though the actual rule was carried out in the material and the physical realm, its justifications were provided for in the symbolic and discursive arena. So the relationship between culture and imperialism is in fact so closely tied that the latter could not be imagined without the former. So a call to re-energize attempts to understand this relationship has been made by Shom and Hedge. Shom and Hedge, as they argue for the indispensable of a role of a post-colonial perspective in studying contemporary global culture. And considering colonialism and literature means at the same time to consider questions of language. So the language of the colonizer and colonized will be in conflict on various levels. As example, those of dominance, control, and obedience of or of culture, authority, and prestige, and related to all of them of linguistic and connected to this cultural identity. And these problems can be traced back to the times of antiquity. However, discarding a mythos like that of Bacchus having already been in India. I mean, since European colonialism began in early pre-modern time, it may be permitted to start reflections here from the very end of the 15th century. Means that question of in India up to the beginning of the so-called Anglo-Indian literature and the contemporary Indian in English have to be seen before the background of the beginning European colonization with the Portuguese arriving at Calicut on the southwestern shore of India. So in the summary of my contribution on occasion of the International Symposium in November justice, that is what is the starting point of this period is the question of the use of English and the writing of literature in English in India must be seen before the broader background of European colonialism and beginning with Portuguese colonization from the time of early modern period into second half of the 20th century. So this is it. So the English Jesuit Thomas Stephens, which in the year 1549 to 1619, and he was one of the very early European occupied with linguistic studies in India. His name hasn't remained for the diffusion of English in India for his grammatical and biblical Konkani and Marathi. So while this even today we must be organized as pioneer work, it must not be forgotten that his activity has to be seen too as a contribution and a tool for the upbuilding of colonial hegemony, rule and control. As for example, Pratima Kamath writes, the efforts of Jesuit Orientalists like Thomas Stephens, Miguel Example, Pratima Kamat, sorry, Miguel D. Almeida, Antonio D. Saldanha, Diageo Ribeiro, and the Raquel Ness to study the local languages and write. And compile lexicographs and grammars in them, constituted as Bernard Corn has argued in another context. That is an important part of the colonial project of control and command. So this is it. So letters in English, which Thomas Stephens sent home, stimulated his father and friends of his father to engage themselves in commercial activities with India even before the establishment of the English First India Company. So the merchants and other people involved with that company, which took up business in India at the very beginning of the 17th century, used English, and their surrounding English must have begun to be spoken by the Indians. And Dean Muhammad in the year from 1759 to 1851, who stayed in Ireland and England from 1784 to 1851. He died in England, left a travelogue in form of letters published in 1754, which constitutes one of the first documents written in English by an Indian. So with his often cited as we too in previous lectures, example, Thomas Babington Macaulay made a lasting contribution to the discussion of the use of languages in India. That is in Miniton, Indian Education, from 2nd February 1835. This is Thomas Babington. He made a lasting contribution to the discussion of the use of the language in India. So this text, which Macaulay advocates not only the use of English, but as well as Anglicization for those Indians who should work for the British, has become known too for the contemptuous attitude of its author towards the native languages and their literature. And by the 1930s, the Indian struggle for independence and freedom from British colonialism had considerably developed. With the boycott of foreign goods, Swadeshi, wearing homespun clothes, khadi, and the taking of untaxed salt. In the same decade, works by 3 authors began to appear, which are repeatedly brought forth as representative for Indian literature in English on an advanced level. These are Mulkraj Anand in 1905, born in Peshawar, now in Pakistan. R.K. Narayan from the 1906 up to 2001, born in Madras. What is now in Tamil Nadu, and Raja Rao, 1908, born in Mysore, now in Karnataka. So they closed to write in English and like other intellectuals of their time, reflected upon the stage of English by Indian writers. And Narayan begins his essay English in India, written in 1960s, by describing his initiative to write as a 5-year-old child. That quotation is, I was caught to share the 2 letters of the alphabet with corn spread out on a tray, both in Sanskrit and Tamil. So the Sanskrit, because it was the classical language of India, Tamil because it was the language of province in which he was born, and it was his mother tongue. So connected to the complex of colonialism, language, cultural identity, one of the most often cited and known text is Raja Raw's forward to his novel Kandapura. And similar to what Narayan says, he argues that the Indian English has to gain its own character. Although the texts has been cited so often, it shall reproduce it larger one time more. That is, the English is not really an alien language to us, and it is the language of our intellectual makeup. Like Sanskrit or Persian was before, but not for our emotional makeup. We are all instinctively bilingual, many of us writing in our own language and in English. And we cannot write like the English. We should not. We cannot write only as, we cannot write only as Indians. We have grown to look at the large world as part of us. So that is the intellectual words by our literary giants. So we should not, we cannot write only as Indians. We have grown to look the large world as part of us. So our method of expression therefore has to be a dialect which will someday prove to be as distinctive and colorful as the Irish or the American. The fact that English is not the only language in India, which came from outside, has been repeatedly brought in as an argument for the choice of language. Salman Rushdie too points to Urdu when discussing the use of English as an Indian. On the other hand, post-colonialism has its impact on Indian English literature. So the broad meaning of the term post-colonialism can be best understood by tracing the etymology of the word post and colony. The word post is derived from the Latin term postus, which means after or behind. The word colony takes its origin from the Latin term colonus, and which refers to a cultivator, a planter, or a settler in a new land. Literally, the term post-colonialism refers to the period after colonialism. Broadly, the term post-colonialism refers to the ways in which race, ethnicity, culture, human identity itself are represented in the modern era after many colonized countries gained their independence. Until the mid 20th century, the European powers exerted their dominance over the vast regions of Asia, Africa, and South America. The dominance was confined not only to the political lives of the people, but also extended to the cultural, economic, and social living conditions of the colonized people. A massive struggle in the colonized nations resulted in the overthrow of the colonial rule. These liberated nations are known as post-colonial, suggesting liberation from colonialism and imperialism. In this way, the term post-coloniality can be defined as the historical, cultural, economical, political, and actual living conditions of the newly independent nations. So until the lion learns how to write, every story will glorify the hunter. So these words of Nosifo Merari stresses the necessity and significance of post-colonial literature. So the term post-colonial literature refers to literature produced by the people who were formerly colonized and subjugated. In other words, post-colonial literature refers to the body of the works by the colonized people to annihilate the influences exerted by the colonizers in their lives. The post-colonial literature emerged in the mid-20th century when many colonized nations were fighting for their liberation from the colonizers. One of the writer, Helen Gilbert's definition to post-colonialism as it is the term that indicates a degree of agency or a program of resistance against cultural domination, signals the existence of a particular historical legacy, a stage in a culture's transition into a modern nation state. The term post-colonial has become a convenient term to describe any kind of resistance against class, race, and gender oppression. The Australian critics Bill Ashcroft, Gareth Griffiths, and Helen Tiffins enlisted the of the term post-colonial as to all the cultures affected by the imperial process, the moment of colonialism to the present day. And this is because there is a continuity of preoccupations throughout the historical processes initiated by the European imperial aggression. Post-colonial writers differ in their view of choice of language in post-colonial writings. So writers stress the use of native language in their works. So these writers strongly believe that their age-old customs, manners, and traditions can be expressed best in their native language. Yugi Wa Thiong's, a post-colonialist writer from Kenya, is one such writer who had a successful start in the English language. So Yugi then ceased to write in English and started writing in Gigiyu, a language spoken primarily by the Kenyuyu people of Kenya. So the language is Gigiyu. It's a language in Kenya. So another set of writers prefer the usage of the language of colonizers, may it be English or French. The French, these writers wanted to enhance their the inter-nation communication by writing in English, and they aim to they aim at reindirecting the tool of language against the colonizers. So the post-colonial English writers employ the colonizers' language to oppose the colonizers and to rectify the damages created by them in the historical, social, cultural, and economical sects. However, these writers transform the English language so as to create a native experience. So the post-colonial writers like Raja Rao, Mulk Raj Anand, and Chinua Achebe are of the view that the imperial language need to be transferred in order to suit the native readers. Therefore, they employed the techniques of appropriation and nativization of the English language. So the post-colonial writings are replete with regional dialects and native phrases so as to suit the native readers. Chinua Achebe, a renowned post-colonial writer, expresses his views as the English language will be able to carry the weight of my African experience, but it will have to be new English, still in full communion with its ancestral home, but altered to suit its new surroundings. This was told by Chinua Achebe. However, modifying the imperial language so as to suit the native cultural experiences is a scholastic process. It's a scholastic process. So post-colonialism as a critical theory emerged in the mid-20th century. Post-colonial theory is a literary theory or critical approach which focuses on the literature produced by the countries which were once colonized. In some instances, it is also deals with the literature written by the colonizing countries, which takes colonies and their people as the subject matter. They has taken their colonies and their people as their subject matter. So the Australian critics, Bill Ashcroft, Gareth Griffiths, and Helen Tiffins, summarize the essence of post-colonial theory in a nutshell as post-colonial theory involves discussion about experience of various kinds of migration, slavery, suppression, resistance, representation, difference in race, gender, place, and responses to the influential master discourses of imperial Europe, such as history, philosophy, and linguistics, and the fundamental experiences of speaking and writing, by which all these come into being. None of these is essentially post-colonial, but together they form the complex fabric of the field. The ancestry of post-colonial criticism can be traced to Franz Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth, published in French in the year 1961. However, Edward Said's book Orientalism, which was published in the year the Orientalism, Edward Said's book Orientalism, was published in the year 1978. It is considered a foundational work in colonial studies. On its Orientalism says as Edward Said's Orientalism. It's a specific expose of the Eurocentric universalism, which takes for granted both the superiority of what is European or Western and the inferiority of what is not. So the major exponents of post-colonial theories are Robert J.C. Young, Gayatri Chakravarti, Spivak, and Homi Kebba. Critics have contributed a lot to the field of post-colonial discourse. So the Indian subcontinent remained under the imperial rule for 200 years. The imperial rule, the natives were subjected to a number of harassments, especially the culture and moral lives of the natives were deeply disconfigured. Accordingly, the Indian writers emerged with a view to unite Indians and to wipe out the colonial perspectives. As there were many regional languages in India, the Indian writers chose English as the medium of their writings. The literature produced by the Indian writers in English came to be known as Indian English literature. The early works of the Indian English authors were set against the backdrop of the post-colonial themes of nationalism, racism, ethnicism, and cultural identity. The writers also dealt with a variety of sub-themes such as rootlessness, alienation, gender discrimination, labor exploitation, hybridity, poverty, corruption, marginalism, and so on, and so on. So among the various genres of post-colonial Indian literature, the genre of novel emerged as the most successful and effective one. Amit Chaudhary, in his book, The Picador Book of Modern Indian Literature, expresses his view about novel as the post-colonial novel becomes a trope for an ideal hybridity, by which the West celebrates not so much Indianness, whatever that infinitely complex thing is, but its own historical quest, its reinterpretation of itself. So the early exponents of post-colonial Indian English literature are Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, Sri Aurobindo, Rabindranath Tagore, Mulkraj Anand, Raja Rao, R.K. Narayana, and so on. So the writers of the modern age are Salman Rushdie, Hanif Krishi, Rohinton Mistry, Amitabh Ghosh, Vikram Seth, Shashi Tharoor, and so on. So the post-colonial Indian English literature gave enormous scope for the women writers. The women writers who received universal recognition are Nayandara Shagal, Anita Desai, Arundhati Roy, Kiran Desai, Jhumpa Lahiri, and so on, and so on, and so on. So the women writers of the post-colonial Indian English literature switched on to the microscopic themes of alienation, poverty, isolation, and disillusionment in the familial lives of the Indian folk. Anita Desai's first novel, Cry the Peacock, published in the year 1963, echoes the sufferings and agony of the Indian women folk. Next, the Maya, the woman protagonist of the novel, experiences an unhappy marital life. Maya has been married to a mid-aged lawyer named Gautama, who devotes much of his time to his career. Next, the astrologer's prediction of about Maya's early demise makes her nervous. She wants to enjoy life to the fullest with his minimal time. However, all her sexual advances has a cold response from Gautama. In a sense of dejection, Maya is driven insane, which leads to Gautama's tragic death. Maya's sense of alienation and rootlessness reflects the plight of the entire Indian women folk. So in his book, the Second Sex, Simon de Beauvoir's Second Sex says as, one is not born but rather becomes a woman. No biological, psychological, or economic fate determines the figure that the human female presence in society. It is civilization as a whole that produces this creature. So this is the words taken place in Simon de Beauvoir's The Second Sex. So in this way, the colonial Indian English authors composed their works with a view to voice the sufferings of the underprivileged in order to uplift them, thereby contributing to the growth of the nation, both culturally and socially. Having relieved themselves from the manacles of imperialism, the Indian people rejoiced and enjoyed the fresh air of freedom with a sense of reverence towards the nation. But this unity was soon shaken up by the various anti-social elements who encouraged a sense of discrimination in the minds of the Indians in terms of race, gender, caste, color, creed, region, language, and so on. So the anti-nationalist forces wanted to divide people so as to obstruct the progress of the country. Hence, the people of India must bear in mind the importance of unity, which alone can pave way for the nation's progress. So rise up and salute the sun. Susie Chasm writes as mankind should always stay united, standing shoulder to shoulder, so evil can never cheat and divide them. Nowadays, the corona came to all over the country, all over the world. We have to stay in home. We have to save our lives. That is the unity now. If we do that, we will be saved. Otherwise, no chance. There is no security for our life, our lives. So that is it. So Susie Kesam, a writer, says mankind should always stay united, standing shoulder to shoulder, shoulder to shoulder, so evil can never cheat and divide them. In this regard, literature plays an important role in the national integration of your country. Yes. So Albert Camus, another person, expresses his view about the responsibility of the writers as the purpose of a writer to protect civilization from destroying itself. Possible only for a writer to shape the minds of the readers. It is possible only for the teachers to shape the minds of the students. Yes, so like that, it is only possible. Albert Camus says it is only possible only for a writer to shape the minds of the readers so as to lead them towards holistic view of nationalism. So the post-colonialism, colonial Indian writers continue to exert a dominant influence in the Indian scenario by inculcating the values and significance of nationalism. So that is it. So Albert Camus' view is a very excellent one. He says the responsibility of the writers as such. Thank you. Thank you, one and all. Be safe in your home. Thank you.
Thank you.
Maheshwaran sir. Maheshwaran sir. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your valuable speech. And it is very clear about the colonialism. And I think it is a great survey of the colonialism. Now it's a time to the paper presentations.
Yeah, sure, ma'am. How many are there, ma'am?
Only 4 members, ma'am. I think Adil of Firoz.
Yes, ma'am. Hello?
Yeah, you can proceed.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yeah, you are audible.
Yes. Thank you, ma'am. Good morning. Yeah, actually, it's going to be good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. And right now, we heard a wonderful deliverance of speech by the renowned resource person, and I'm so glad that I could attend that, talking about the post-colonialism and matters like that. And here, let me introduce myself. I'm Adila Feroz.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I'm a second year BA English student, learning in Naipunya College, Thrissur, Kerala. And the topic of the paper that I wish to present today is exploring the colonial traits in the post-colonial world through the short story, The Big Fish, written by N.P. Hafiz Mohammed. It's actually a translation of one of the short stories taken from the collection, Cheriya Meenugalum Valiya Malsyavum. Okay, and the translation is done by Dr. K.M. Sharif. And here, in this short story, it basically targets at the neoliberal policy and the neo-colonial ideologies of the West. And the third world countries are actually interpolated into the societal norms as well as the Western notions directed by this neoliberalism. But through a research, I would like to explore the colonial traits that are still prevalent in this post-colonial world through this short story. And this short story has been wonderfully crafted with many of the native language usages, or the functions, the names are written in that way itself without translating into English by saying Nendrappalam, actually a banana, Kerala. And talking about the neoliberal ideologies, I would like to talk about the new economic policy and the intellectual patent laws and property rights. So all of these are the implementations of the West. And accordingly, in the masquerade of liberalization and trying to civilize the third world countries, they are actually imposing the hegemonic notions and interpolations in an adroit and secret manner. And thus, still now we could say that we are not totally liberated from the clutches of the West. That means the traits of colonialism are still prevalent in this post-colonial world. Going through this short story, The Big Fish, written by N.P. Hafiz Mohammed, we could see the protagonist, Alison Kuti, and the story is based in the context of northern Kerala, a small village there. And Alison Kuti, in the beginning, in the first scene of the short story, he's seen sitting near a small pond, and he's talking to the small fishes he is rearing there. At that time, an agent comes to his house, and he talks with them, with his family, Alison Kuti and Mariam, and likewise, he is trying to make them join into a collective fish farming. And he tries to, in a sort of, interpolate them. And all these scenes are actually metaphorical descriptions of how the Western world is trying to interpolate the people of the third world countries. And in the masquerade of trying to establish a common law and even equality in the matters of trade and industries, they are actually deteriorating the culture and traditions that are followed by the third world countries. And here Alison Kuti is seen quite shocked by hearing what the agent says regarding rearing the fish in his small pond artificially and selling them. And he says to the agent that it is indeed against his traditional norms, and it is going to affect him in a bad way, as it is going to invite the wrath of the ancestors. But at that time, there is a common past. Thank you for that. comment I just read in the chat. Thank you so much. There's a comment passed by the agent telling that crude and uncivilized ways and foolish beliefs to back them. See how they are undermining the culture and the traditions of the third world countries? And Mariam, the wife of Alison Kutry, who was so concerned about their life and how they would somehow make their children join colleges in the future, and how they would make their life secure, and how they would lead a wonderful life, because Alison Kutry is he's so a poor man, but he enjoys this life, the life that he lives here, believing the pleasures of the hereafter, because that is exactly the beliefs of the medieval world too, the hereafter, and having a strong and ardent belief in God, and doing good deeds accordingly, and enjoying even the meager income that he receives by selling the coconuts in his farmland, and accordingly. But Mariam, she wishes to have a life of pleasure. So she advises Alison Kutry to listen to the words of the agent carefully and take a right decision. And even the agent comments on the decision they are yet to take by saying that you have nothing to lose and everything to gain. And finally, Alison Kutry, he has no other way but to just pay heed to what his wife says, because she goes into an indefinite period of fasting, and Alison Kutry has no other way out. So he approaches the agent and he becomes part of the collective fish farming. But what happens is that the big fish that are introduced into the pond, it devours the small fish eventually. And this is a wonderful metaphorical.
Okay,
yes, sir.
Sorry for the inconvenience, because we are almost end of the session. Okay, because we are allotted only for 5 minutes. Okay, so just we are going to call upon another post. Thank you for the valuable information. Yes, okay.
Yeah, I'm just concluding just a few sentences. Yeah, I'll be concluding right now. Yeah.
Okay.
And the big fish, it's a great metaphorical description, because it relates to the multinational corporates. And the small fish, it represents the third world countries. And so this story is a wonderful way by which I could explore the colonial traits that are still prevalent in the post-colonial world. And thank you so much for giving this opportunity. Thank you, sir. Sorry for taking much time.
Thank you.
Exceeded the time. Yeah,
Okay,
thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your valuable presentation. And next, I call upon Shamim Bani. The paper present is only for 5 minutes. Okay, just now, can you? Shamim Bani from Karaikudi, Tamil Nadu.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon to one of my persons here. Am I audible, sir?
Yes.
Yes.
Audible.
Yes, I am J. Shamim Banu, research scholar in Allahabad University. The title of my paper presentation is A Global Acclamation in Adichie's Half of Ellison. The background of the novel is based on the Republic of Biafra. The title of the novel was taken from National Flag of Biafra. In November 2020, Half of Ellison was voted by the public to be the best book to have won the Women's Prize for Fiction in its 25-year history. The novel is organized into 4 sections actually. The first and second parts are during the early and late 60s. The third part is switched back to the mid-60s. The fourth section of the novel, which is in the last part of the 1960s, actually it continues the account of the war and its weakening consequences for the individuals of Biafra. Half of Ellison is told from the perspective of generally Igbo characters. Actually, Britain began all the difficulty by colonizing and abusing Nigeria, and it working upon ethnic pressures and providing arms to Nigeria during the war. Adichie, the author, investigates the topics of war, human severity, and inhumanity. She's spelling out the adoration, trust, fellowship, and nation among young soldiers. Half of Ellison is one of the incredible truth-revealing stories, both in Nigeria and around the globe. It was numerous first experiences with the Biafran struggle. So each and everything in the novel depends on something genuine. So, as a conclusion, I would like to mention it is a story that shows being human, to face our own mortality, to be defenseless, and to be at the battle with oneself amidst political disturbances. So, thus, Adichie's Hofer of Ellison emerges as a global acclamation. Thank you, sir. Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, Shamim Bani. Okay, next I call upon Dinesh Kumar, Colonel from Andhra Pradesh. Dinesh Kumar, Colonel from Andhra Pradesh.
I think he is not here, sir.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, I'm going to go to things.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Oh, okay.
There is some questions in the chat box. I have seen 2 questions are there.
Yes, ma'am. You can, ma'am.
Yeah. One person asked tricontinentalism. What is it meant by? He has asked. It means it defined the cultural nationalism and anti-racism of 3 decades. That is tricontinentalism. It has taken place between the years 1930s to 1950s. It was slowly beginning to be. So that is tricontinentalism. And another one has asked what is the post-colonialism and the hyphenated word post-colonialism. Both are the same.
Yes.
There is no difference. Both are the same. Okay. So those 2 questions has taken place in the chat box. I think you clarified it. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, ma'am. First, thank you. First, I would like to give special thanks for our research person, Dr. Sangeeta ma'am, head of the Department of English, Government, Arts and Science College, Kalakurchi. Next, I thank Dr. Pirini Melina, head of the Department of English, Immaculate Women's College of Arts and Science, for organizing today's international webinar. And next, I would like to give special thanks wholeheartedly all the participants and paper presenter and students and dear makers. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for all, and we will see tomorrow on the same meet.
Ma'am, what about the feedback link, ma'am?
Tomorrow only we will send that.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you for all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.